In Egypt's Giza Governorate, at approximately 29.9 degrees north, 31.1 degrees east, stands the last surviving wonder of the ancient world, a structure so familiar it has become almost invisible. We think we know the Great Pyramid of Khufu. It is less a building and more a global icon, a fixed point in human history that we have measured, mapped, and photographed into oblivion. But our certainty is built on an incomplete blueprint. For 4.5 millennia, it has guarded its secrets with an unnerving silence, and in 2017, we learned that silence was concealing a literal void. An international team, under the banner of the Scan Pyramids Project, decided to look at the pyramid in a way no one had before, not with drills or dynamite, but with muons. These are subatomic particles, byproducts of cosmic rays that rain down on Earth constantly, passing through empty space but being absorbed or deflected by dense materials like stone. By placing detectors inside the pyramid, scientists could map its internal density, particle by particle. The result was an anomaly that simply should not have been there. Directly above the ascending Grand Gallery, they found a vast, empty space estimated to be at least 30 meters long, with a cross-section comparable to the gallery itself. Imagine a hidden corridor the length of a blue whale, sealed, silent, and entirely unknown, floating inside the most famous building in history. The prevailing theory is that it's a constructional feature, a gap left to relieve the immense weight pressing down on the Grand Gallery below, a perfectly sound engineering explanation. And yet, no one can get to it. No connecting passages have been found. It remains a black box on the architectural diagram, a humbling reminder that seeing isn't always knowing. If we can miss an empty space the size of an airliner's fuselage inside a monument we scrutinize daily, what have we missed in places that were swallowed whole by the earth and the sea? What happens when a city, not just a chamber, vanishes from the map? In Egypt's Alexandria Governorate, at approximately 31.3 degrees north, 30.2 degrees east, the waters of Abu Qir Bay conceal the answer to what happens when a city, not just a chamber, vanishes from the map. For over 1,000 years, the city known to the Greeks as Heraklion and to the Egyptians as Thonis was less a place and more a footnote in classical texts, a ghost story told by Herodotus. Then, in the year 2000, a survey team, led by underwater archaeologist Frank Goddio, found it. The city wasn't just gone, it was preserved, resting 6.5 kilometers from the current coastline under 10 meters of water and a thick layer of sediment. For centuries, historians debated its existence, a conversation that ended rather abruptly when divers started cataloging over 60 shipwrecks and 700 anchors. This was no mythical outpost. This was Egypt's primary customs port during the late period, the mandatory gateway for all Greek trade. We know this with certainty because Gaudio's team found the city's administrative key, an almost perfectly intact black granodiorite stele, a decree from Pharaoh Nectanebo I explicitly laying out the taxes, a 10% levy, to be collected on Greek goods at this specific port of Thonis. It was the city's official birth certificate, found in its grave. The city didn't fall to an enemy. It fell victim to geology. Built on the unstable silt and clay of the Nile Delta, the ground beneath its massive temples and stone buildings was susceptible to soil liquefaction. A significant earthquake, a common event in the region, would have been enough to turn the water-saturated sediment into a fluid, causing the city to collapse into the sea with surprising speed. It was a catastrophic structural failure on a municipal scale. Thonis Heraklion demonstrates how a center of civilization can be methodically erased by the slow, inexorable forces of geology and water. But what about a force that is faster, more violent? What happens when it's not a city that vanishes, but an entire army, swallowed not by the sea, but by the desert in a single furious storm? Somewhere within the vast expanse of Egypt's western desert, a region largely within the New Valley Governorate and centered roughly around 26.5 degrees north, 26.5 degrees east, lies the answer to that very question. In 524 BC, the Persian king Cambyses II, having recently conquered Egypt, dispatched an expeditionary force from Thebes. The target, the Siwa Oasis, home to the influential Oracle of Amun. The historian Herodotus, our sole source for the event, puts the number of soldiers at 50,000. According to his account, the army marched for 7 days into the desert and then simply ceased to exist. A violent southern wind allegedly kicked up a sandstorm of such impossible magnitude that it buried the entire contingent, men and material alike. The problem is, beyond Herodotus, there is complete silence. No Persian records mention the loss of a 50,000-man army, a military catastrophe that would have crippled an empire. No Egyptian texts celebrate the divine intervention that wiped out their conquerors. For 500 years, the story has remained just that, a story. Modern attempts to locate the army have yielded nothing but controversy and sand. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have found anomalies, but none have been excavated and confirmed as a massive, buried Persian force. The logistical challenge alone of moving 50,000 troops across that specific stretch of desert, one of the most arid and unforgiving on the planet, makes the number suspect. It's a perfect cold case. A story so compelling, yet so devoid of physical proof, that it forces a reevaluation of our most trusted historical sources. If you find this process of forensic re-examination as compelling as we do, consider subscribing to our channel. Our work is to separate fact from folklore, and the more support we have, the deeper we can dig. Unlike Thonis Heracleon, which left behind a city's worth of evidence, Cambyses' army left behind a complete void. It's an absence of data that is, itself, the central clue. But while an army may vanish without a trace, what about an idea? What if the most profound secrets are not buried under sand or sea, but are hidden in plain sight, written in stone and aligned with the stars? In the New Valley Governorate, at approximately 22.5 degrees north, 30.7 degrees east, we find a potential answer to that very question. This is Nabta Playa. And here, the secret isn't a missing army. It's a misplaced timeline. While we were searching for Cambyses' lost men, we may have been overlooking the origins of the very thinking that built ancient Egypt. This site contains what is arguably the world's oldest known archaeoastronomical device. The main stone circle here is dated to approximately 5000 BC. To put that in perspective, the first stones at Stonehenge wouldn't be raised for another 2.5 millennia. The circle itself is modest, only 4 meters across, but its alignments are precise. 2 pairs of stones mark a perfect north-south line, while another 2 mark the summer solstice sunrise. That much is verifiable fact. The more provocative data comes from the wider array of megaliths. Researchers have proposed that these larger stones map the sky, creating a representation of the heavens on Earth. The alignments appear to track the precession of the equinoxes, and specifically, the rising of the 3 stars of Orion's belt, Sirius and Arcturus, as they would have appeared between 400 BC and 900 BC. The mathematics involved are not simple. The most confounding detail? The people who built this were not settled agriculturalists. They were semi-nomadic cattle herders. Carbon-dated remains show this was a seasonal gathering place, centered around a lake that has long since vanished. Why would a nomadic culture, supposedly concerned only with subsistence, dedicate generations of effort to building a complex celestial clock? It fundamentally challenges the textbook model of civilization. This wasn't just a calendar. Excavations of ceremonial cattle burials suggest it was a ritual center of profound importance, an idea born in stone, long before the first pharaoh. And this raises a critical question. Did this knowledge die in the desert when the rains stopped, or did it simply move north, down the Nile, to be hidden in new and even more elaborate ways? In the Aswan Governorate, at approximately 24.63 degrees north, 32.93 degrees east, the Nile narrows, and the answer to where that desert knowledge went becomes tangible. It didn't just move as an idea, it was hewn from the earth itself. This is Gebel el-Silsila. For over 1,000 years, this was the industrial heart of the New Kingdom, the largest sandstone quarry in ancient Egypt. An estimated 8 million tons of stone were cut from these cliffs to build Karnak, Luxor, and the Colossi of Memnon. The grand narrative of Egypt was literally extracted from this spot, but the real story here isn't the quarry, it's what was hidden within it. Tucked away along the West Bank are 32 rock-cut chapels or cenotaphs. These aren't tombs, they are memorials, carved directly into the sandstone by the very officials who managed these massive state projects. Here we find the private records of men like Hapuseneb, high priest of Amun, and Senenmut, Queen Hatshepsut's chief architect. It's a bit like finding the personal diaries of project managers at a major construction site. The data from the inscriptions is precise. They don't just boast, they record specific expeditions, the number of ships used, the dimensions of the obelisks and statues they were commissioned to quarry. The question is, why here? Why build a personal, sacred memorial in the middle of a loud, dusty industrial zone? The answer lies in the location itself. The bend in the river was believed to be the place where the Nile originated, the source of the life-giving flood. By carving their chapels here, these officials weren't just memorializing their careers, they were embedding themselves into the most vital cosmic cycle their world knew. They were hiding their legacy not in a remote tomb, but in plain sight, at the very source of Egypt's power. A legacy of personal ambition tied to a source of divine energy. And it's this fusion of the human and the cosmic that leads us to our next enigma, where a simple stone carving might just be a blueprint for a technology we can't explain. In the Quina Governorate, at roughly 26.14 degrees north, 32.67 degrees east, we find the Dendera Temple Complex, and that fusion of the human and the cosmic becomes less of a concept and more of a schematic. Deep beneath the main floor of the Temple of Hathor, in a series of a dozen narrow crypts, the walls are covered in some of the most unusual reliefs in all of Egypt. The most famous is in Crypt C South, a chamber only 4.6 meters wide. It depicts figures holding what can only be described as a giant, transparent, bulb-like object. Inside, a snake is shown emerging from a lotus flower, which itself sits atop a Djed pillar, the symbol of stability. A line, like a cable, runs from a small box to the base of the bulb. To proponents of alternative history, this is irrefutable proof of ancient electrical technology, the Dendera light. They see a Crookes tube, with the snake as the plasma filament and the Djed pillar as a high-voltage insulator. It's an attractive theory, particularly when paired with the often cited, though debatable, lack of soot on the ceilings of many temple chambers. Egyptologists, however, are resolute. The image is purely symbolic, a mythological representation of the sun god Harsamtus being born from a lotus flower, which is the womb of the sky. The bulb is the celestial bubble of creation. The problem with this tidy explanation is the Egyptians themselves. Their iconography was precise, a visual language refined over millennia for maximum clarity. To render a fundamental creation myth in a way that, thousands of years later, looks identical to a diagram of a gas discharge lamp is, at the very least, a statistical anomaly. It's a Rorschach test in sandstone. The question isn't whether they had light bulbs. The question is, what specific knowledge of energy, of cosmic mechanics were they encoding in this image, and why hide it in a cramped, inaccessible crypt? That question of hidden knowledge and the search for the final resting place of a figure who wielded immense power takes us to the windswept coast just west of Alexandria. In the Alexandria Governorate at approximately 30.86 degrees north, 29.51 degrees east, a limestone outcrop overlooks the Mediterranean. This is Taposiris Magna, and for over a decade, it has been the singular obsession of archaeologist Kathleen Martinez. The objective: locate the tomb of Cleopatra VII and her lover, Mark Antony. The logic is compelling. Cleopatra styled herself as the living incarnation of the goddess Isis. It follows that she would be buried alongside her Osiris, Antony, in a temple dedicated to the god. The evidence is tantalizing. Martinez's team has unearthed a necropolis containing burial shafts, mummies with golden tongues meant to allow them to speak to Osiris in the afterlife, and hundreds of coins bearing Cleopatra's face. Ground-penetrating radar has mapped a vast network of tunnels, over a kilometer long, beneath the temple, some now submerged by the rising water table. The problem is that after unearthing 500 artifacts and clearing chamber after chamber, the primary target remains elusive. It's the ultimate archaeological cold case. The last queen of Egypt, a woman who commanded armies and captivated emperors, seems to have orchestrated her final disappearance with the same meticulous strategy she applied to statecraft. The search here isn't just for a body, but for the final, unwritten chapter of a life that has been mythologized for 2 millennia. For now, the queen's final resting place remains her last, most defiant secret, a mystery sealed not in stone, but in the earth and water of her lost kingdom. In the Cairo Governorate, at approximately 30.03 degrees north, 31.27 degrees east, the Mokattam Hills rise above the sprawling metropolis. While archaeologists dig for the final secret of a long-dead queen, another of Egypt's profound mysteries is hidden not in a sealed tomb, but carved into the very face of this mountain, in plain sight. It's a secret kept by a community known as the Zabaleen. The term translates, somewhat crudely, to the garbage people. For over 70 years, this predominantly Coptic Christian community of roughly 60,000 has served as Cairo's unofficial and hyper-efficient waste management system. They collect thousands of tons of the city's refuse daily, achieving a recycling rate of over 80%, a figure that puts most municipal systems in the developed world to shame. And within their neighborhood, known as Manshiat Nasr, they have accomplished something extraordinary. They have hollowed out the mountain to create the monastery of St. Simon the Tanner. This is not a quaint chapel. The main cathedral is the largest church in the Middle East, with an amphitheater-style seating capacity for 20,000 people. It is one of 7 churches in the complex, all hand-carved directly from the rock. The site is named for a 10th-century Coptic saint who, legend holds, moved this very mountain through the power of faith. But the modern miracle here is less about moving a mountain and more about hollowing one out. It was built by the Zabaleen themselves, beginning in 1975, a colossal act of communal will and engineering without formal blueprints. This isn't an ancient ruin. It is a living, breathing testament to resilience. It's a hidden world not because it's lost, but because we so often choose not to look. It demonstrates that sometimes the most monumental structures aren't built for the dead by kings, but for the living by the overlooked.